Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 6 important articles. So let's cover all of them comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us with your likes and comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu and let's look at this important column from page number 10. This article helps us understand the provisions of the Places of Worship Act of 1991. So first, let's understand the context as to why the topic is in news, and then we shall dive deep into this topic and go beyond the article to understand the provisions of Places of Worship Act and come up with a critical assessment of this law. Recently in Uttar Pradesh, communal tensions broke out at the Sambal district over the Shahi Jama Masjid Mosque controversy. I'm sure some of you would be aware that at a lower court, a case was filed alleging that Shahi Jama Masjid, which is a 16th century mosque located in the Sambal district of UP, it was alleged to have been built on the ruins of a Hindu temple, which allegedly was destroyed by then Mughal ruler Babur in 1529. This petition was entertained by a trial court and it called for a survey of the mosque. So this order of the trial court to examine the religious character of the place of worship triggered violence leading to communal riots and 4 people were killed. Now this is nothing new in India. We have seen many such repeat incidents, especially in recent years, where the religious character of places of worship, particularly mosques, are called into question in a court of law, alleging that once upon a time it was a temple which had been destroyed by Mughal invaders and rulers. So when these cases are considered and when surveys are ordered through trial courts, this could affect the secular fabric of the country, increase communal tensions, and to prevent such developments, specifically in order to prevent such developments, a law had been enacted in 1991, which is the Places of Worship Act 1991. The then P.V. Narasimha Rao government had brought out this law to ensure that the secular fabric of the nation is protected and we don't open up old historical wounds which might harm the secular fabric of the nation. So in this context, it becomes important to understand what are the provisions of the law. Now, such incidents reminds us of the Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi dispute, and it becomes important to examine the provisions of the law. How does it apply for these cases, and what was the exemption that was given to the Ayodhya dispute, and also look at what have been the interpretation of the Supreme Court regarding places of worship and questions regarding their religious character. So let's take a look at this. And first, let's start with the provisions of the law. The Places of Worship Act was brought out by the then P.V. Narasimha Rao government during the heated communal period of the Ram Janmabhoomi dispute and the demolition of Babri Masjid in 1992. It was in this context that this law was introduced. The law specifically focuses on preserving the religious character of a place of worship. It sets a date as a cutoff date. So if a place of worship on August 15, 1947, that is on the day India became independent, if it was a temple or a mosque or a church, whatever it was, the religious character of that place of worship cannot be altered, cannot be changed after this date. The law preserves the character of a place of worship as it existed on the day that India became independent. The idea was to ensure that going forward, places of worship and their religious character shall not be called into question after India gained independence. So this would ensure that historical wounds are not opened up, these allegations are not brought up which could destroy the secular fabric of the nation and could lead to communal tensions in the country. The law explicitly prohibits the courts from examining any such cases regarding the religious character of a place of worship. Section 3 of the Act forbids the conversion of a place of worship from one religious denomination to the other, and even within sects of a particular religion. So the law also prohibits the conversion of the religious denomination of a place of worship from one religion to the other, and even within a religion, changing its denomination from one sect to another is prohibited under the law after August 15th, 1947. But however, the law made an exception. The exception was for the Rama Janmabhoomi dispute, where the Lord Ramalalla himself was the litigant. Because by the time the law was introduced by the parliament, the Ayodhya dispute had been a sub judice matter. It had already been taken up by the courts. So this issue was exempted. So apart from the Babri Masjid, Ram Janmabhoomi issue, any other place of worship, their religious character could not be touched according to this law. Now, this law has been repeatedly challenged on constitutional grounds. Now, first, let's examine the Ayodhya verdict. What did the Constitution Bench rule in the Ayodhya verdict with regard to Places of Worship Act? Because as I said, this law exempted the Ayodhya title dispute. So, the Ayodhya judgment delivered by a 5-judge Constitution Bench did make a very important observation about the Places of Worship Act. So first, let's look at this, and then we will discuss the challenge to the law. Let's look at the other side of the argument as well to ensure that this is a balanced discussion. As I said, there are many petitioners who have challenged the constitutionality of this law. Their allegation is that this law is unconstitutional. Especially, it doesn't allow the Hindu community to challenge the religious character of certain mosques which allegedly might have been built on the ruins of Hindu temples. So, the historical blame is placed on either Muslim rulers or even British colonialists. So, several Hindu petitioners representing various Hindu organizations have challenged the constitutionality of the law, and the matter remains pending in front of the Supreme Court. So, in this context, let's look at both sides of the argument. In the Ayodhya verdict, the 5-judge Constitution Bench stated that this law, the Places of Worship Act 1991, was designed to preserve the secular character of the country. The Supreme Court observed that it places a positive obligation on the state to protect the secular fabric of the nation and ensure that places of worship and their religious character is protected post-independence. So essentially, in the Ayodhya verdict, the Constitution Bench of the Supreme Court had upheld the law, and it had observed that the law was necessary to maintain the secular fabric of the nation and to protect the religious character of a place of worship. And the Supreme Court reiterated that any case, any suits concerning other religious places other than the Ayodhya title dispute should not be entertained by courts. Because that is what the law says, and the law of the land is supreme. So in the Ayodhya verdict, the Supreme Court had barred the institution of any similar cases other than Ayodhya dispute being taken up by the courts concerning the religious character of a place of worship. Now, what is this challenge that has come up in front of the Supreme Court? As I said, there are multiple petitions, a batch of petitions which are pending in front of the Supreme Court challenging the constitutionality of the law itself. In most cases, the petitions are by Hindu organizations or members of Hindu community who allege that this law is preventing Hindus from reclaiming their place of worship. And they allege that their places of worship were destroyed during Islamic rule in the country or during colonialism. And they claim that it is their right to take back those places of worship. So this matter came up for discussion in 2022 in front of the Supreme Court. The then Chief Justice of India, UU Lalit, issued an order to the Government of India asking for the government's response on this matter. The then Chief Justice ordered the government to file an affidavit to know the response of the government, to see where the government stands on the constitutionality of Places of Worship Act. But what is concerning is that the government has not replied to this order of the Supreme Court yet. There has been an inordinate delay by the central government. The government hasn't sent an affidavit to the Supreme Court informing its stand on the constitutionality of this law, the relevance of this law. It is this delay of the center which allows the lower courts essentially to disregard the provision of the law. See, as of now, the law remains valid. It has not been struck down as unconstitutional. So unless and until that happens, the law remains supreme. So these challenges which are being entertained by trial courts based on these frivolous complaints or even genuine complaints, this essentially contradicts the law. It's a violation of the law. It undermines the law of the land. So unless and until the Supreme Court strikes down the law as unconstitutional or the government revokes this law, right, it essentially has to be upheld. So now that the government has not replied and the Supreme Court has not proceeded on this matter since 2022, the matter remains pending, thus enabling the trial courts to consider these cases and order these surveys, which essentially undermines the law and goes against the provisions of the law. So another important incident that comes to mind is the Gyanvapi Mosque incident. In 2021, questions were raised about the religious character of the Gyanvapi Mosque complex, and the matter reached the court eventually that this mosque was also built on the ruins of a Hindu temple. This case eventually reached the Supreme Court and it was examined under Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, the then justice. This was before D.Y. Chandrachud became the Chief Justice of India. So Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, who authored this judgment, by the way, he was also part of the Ayodhya verdict, he remarked that the 1991 Act, the Places of Worship Act, it does not explicitly prohibit an inquiry into the religious character of a place of worship. The law, according to D.Y. Chandrachud, only prohibits the conversion of the religious character of a place of worship. But however, D.Y. Chandrachud interpreted the law that inquiry can be done, that you can inquire, you can check whether a place of worship is a Hindu place of worship or a Muslim place of worship or a Christian place of worship. So essentially, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud in the Gyanvapi Mosque case permitted the inquiries to happen, and this possibly opened the Pandora's box. This was an oral observation, by the way. It was not a recorded judgment or it was not part of the final judgment. It was an oral observation that was made by Justice D.Y. Chandrachud. But this oral observation has set a precedent, and it has essentially allowed the lower courts, the trial courts, to consider the inquiries into every petition, every case that comes up, and thus it undermines the provisions of Places of Worship Act. Now, across India, many such cases have come up and suits have been filed at lower courts. From the Krishna Janmabhoomi Shahi Idgah issue to many similar cases have propped up, including over the Ajmer Dargah Shrine in Rajasthan. So many of these cases are being entertained by lower courts, and this is a contradiction of the law according to the column. But Justice D.Y. Chandrachud had observed that the law does not really prohibit the inquiry whether a place of worship is a Hindu or a Muslim place of worship. It only prohibits the conversion of the character. So if the intention is not to convert the religious character of the place of worship, then an inquiry is allowed according to this judgment or this observation that was made, this oral observation that was made by then Justice D.Y. Chandrachud. So this is where the government of India has to clarify. The government of India has to present its view, its opinion to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has to quickly assess the constitutionality of the law. But until that happens, the law should be upheld, the law should be supreme. So these trial courts are in a way violating the law by repeatedly allowing such inquiries, entertaining such suits and cases. So this remains a controversial matter, a debatable matter, and this is what you need to understand from this important column. So let's see what kind of question can be asked. Critically examine the provisions of the Places of Worship Act. A straightforward question about the provisions of the Act And of course, you'll have to go into the interpretations of the Supreme Court as well, from the Ayodhya verdict and from the Gyanvapi case where Chandrachud made a important observation. So let's see if you can write an answer to this question, and please post your answers in the comment section below. Now let's look at an important editorial from page number 8 related to disaster management. This editorial is based on the recent cyclone Fengal, that brought massive devastation to Tamil Nadu and Puducherry. I am sure you're aware that southern part of India, particularly Tamil Nadu and Puducherry and even parts of Karnataka and Kerala, they bore the full impact of cyclone Fengal, which has caused serious destruction and damage, particularly in few districts of Tamil Nadu and as well as in coastal Puducherry. So this editorial is of the view that extreme weather events are increasing. They are increasing in frequency day by day, year by year, possibly driven by climate change. And as a result, the disaster management authorities, they need to be better prepared for such disasters. The disaster management authorities who implement the disaster management plan and policy, they should move beyond relief and rehabilitation and focus on better preparedness. That is the argument being made by the editorial. So again, let's dive deep into this article and understand what does the editorial mean by moving away from relief and rehabilitation and focus on more on preparedness. So to understand this argument, first we should look at Cyclone Fengal and what happened in Tamil Nadu and Puducherry. The northeast monsoon is very crucial to Tamil Nadu, as parts of Tamil Nadu lies in the rain shadow area of the Western Ghats. These areas do not receive rainfall during the southwest monsoon. So northeast monsoon, which comes in during this period of the year, is critical for this part of the country. So during the northeast monsoon season, it is quite common from November to December to witness these cyclonic storms that brew in the Bay of Bengal. This is indeed a period of intense cyclonic activity. In fact, even in months of September, October and November, December as well, we do see intense cyclonic activity in the Bay of Bengal. So the northeast monsoon, which brings rainfall to Tamil Nadu and Puducherry, is a lifeline for agriculture. But however, this time, the cyclone that was formed, which started out as a depression, which turned into a severe cyclonic storm, it has caused serious damage across Tamil Nadu and Puducherry. Several lives have been lost. There has been large-scale damage to infrastructure and as well as agricultural fields. In fact, the chief ministers of Tamil Nadu and Puducherry have already written to Prime Minister Modi, urging the centre to provide more assistance. So by looking at the scale of destruction and damage, it's quite evident that extreme weather events are having a disastrous impact, and we are seeing the frequency of these events go up consistently over the last few years. Studies in India and around the world indicate that we are likely to experience more frequent extreme weather events and even more intense extreme weather events. So if you take Cyclone Fengal, for example, it not only brought high-speed winds and storm surges, which led to flooding in coastal areas, but it also brought heavy rainfall. Extremely heavy rainfall, which was unprecedented, which was abnormal, was witnessed in Tamil Nadu and Puducherry. Believe it or not, according to IMD data, several places received 40 to 50 centimeters of rainfall in just one day. Many times, this is rainfall received over a month. So that was the volume of water that was dispensed through the heavy rains that occurred during Cyclone Fengal. So naturally, the flooding has taken its toll, even leading to landslides, destruction of property, and eventual casualties. So this development is something which should be a lesson for our disaster management authorities. Even though India has done phenomenally well when it comes to disaster management with regard to cyclones, there is still something that is missing. India's disaster management policy is largely focused on relief and rehabilitation with very little focus on preparedness, planning, and mitigation. See, when you look at the disaster management cycle, there are three essential steps involved in the disaster management cycle. You have the pre-disaster phase, during disaster phase, and post-disaster phase. So in the pre-disaster phase, you focus on planning and preparedness. So you try to prevent a disaster, or if not, at least mitigate the impact of a disaster. During disaster, you focus on providing the best possible emergency relief. So if planning is the focus, planning and preparedness is the focus of pre-disaster, then providing effective emergency relief during disaster is the focus. So emergency relief includes search and rescue operations to search for people who have been lost, rescue people who have been trapped, and provide immediate medical attention, provide first aid, provide emergency supplies from food to water and shelter and clothing. So once the disaster is dealt with, then comes post-disaster management, where the focus is on recovery. The focus is on rehabilitating the displaced people. So recovery, reconstruction, and rehabilitation becomes the focus. And this is a long-term plan, because any major disaster would have destroyed the infrastructure and the region would have been set back with regard to its development. So the destroyed infrastructure will have to be repaired or rebuilt, and the economy will have to be restored. The losses will have to be compensated. The victims will have to be compensated. And eventually, the displaced community will have to be rehabilitated. So this is the focus of post-disaster management. The editorial indicates that even though India has done quite well since 2005, because it was in 2005 that India enacted the Disaster Management Act. The DM Act established a formal institutional structure for disaster management in the country. It established the National Disaster Management Authority along with the state level and district level disaster management authorities. So it basically created a three-tiered institutional mechanism. And the NDMA has now come out with a national disaster management policy and plan, which is in line with India's commitments under the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction. So India's disaster management policy and plan, it matches the global standards laid down under the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction. So if you compare India's performance in disaster management, particularly with regard to cyclones, before the Disaster Management Act, India was never prepared. There was no focus on a structured response. There was no focus on planning, preparedness, and even emergency relief was not up to mark. For example, look at the super cyclone of Odisha in 1999 that caused massive devastation. We barely had early warning systems and forecasting systems, right? So we didn't even have a professional disaster response force. So all of this has changed. There has been a complete shift in India's approach to disaster management. India has become more proactive. Disaster management has been streamlined. It has been mainstreamed into day-to-day governance. And right from national level to the local level, the authorities are well prepared, well trained, and they are well equipped to deal with a variety of disasters. The super cyclone of Odisha in 1999 caused 10,000 plus deaths. But today a cyclone, which might strike the east coast, will leave behind a death count in single digit or maximum in lower double digits. So that is a phenomenal improvement. Our early warning systems have improved. The dissemination of the alert to the local level has improved in real time. Then India has built cyclone shelters across the coastline so that people can be evacuated from low-lying areas. Our search and rescue operations have become much better. And we have a professional force, the National Disaster Response Force, that works with other concerned agencies and forces in search and rescue operations. So it will coordinate with Coast Guard and Navy, the local police as well, and the State Disaster Response Force to provide for effective relief and search and rescue operations. So though India has seen a major transformation and a big improvement, still the focus remains on relief and rehabilitation, but we aren't doing enough when it comes to planning and preparedness, according to the editorial. especially since climate change is driving extreme weather events. We are likely to witness more such extreme meteorological phenomena. It's better that India is more prepared and plans better. So that is the focus of this article. So there is a related article on the supplement page of the science edition, which talks about cyclones in general. Now, with regard to cyclone Fengal, there was something very interesting that we noticed. Cyclone Fengal, it not only struck Tamil Nadu and Puducherry, but it gradually passed over the southern peninsular India to affect even Karnataka and Kerala as well. Southern Karnataka and parts of Kerala and coastal Karnataka also received intense rainfall over the last few days. Now, according to reports, this cyclone, which formed in Bay of Bengal, it not only made landfall on the east coast and caused damage on the east coast of India, but it has passed over peninsular India and crossed over to the Arabian Sea. It has crossed over to the Arabian Sea, where it might likely give rise to another cyclone. So this is a possibility. And especially for prelims, you need to be aware that cyclones can cross over even after landfall. They can cross over a landmass and re-emerge in another sea or ocean. So re-emergence of cyclones is a known phenomena. It's not happening for the first time. In 2021, for example, Cyclone Gulab, which made landfall on the east coast, striking Andhra Pradesh, eventually crossed over peninsular India and re-emerged in the Arabian Sea 4 days later as Cyclone Shaheen. So this is something you should be aware of. The phenomena where Bay of Bengal cyclones might cross over the landmass and re-emerge in the Arabian Sea and cause further damage and destruction. There is also a possibility where cyclones in Bay of Bengal, they recurve and move towards the Arabian Sea. For example, if you remember Cyclone Okchi, which was initially supposed to strike Tamil Nadu, it crossed over from Bay of Bengal, and from here it crossed across the subcontinent, right? It recurved across the subcontinent and entered the Arabian Sea and struck the coastal parts of Kerala, causing enormous destruction. So this is something that you should be aware of, especially for a possible prelims question. So such recurving of cyclones, re-emergence of cyclones is something one should be mindful of when you're planning and preparing for disasters. So this small article also goes on to explain what is a landfall event. See, in a cyclonic system, you have the eye of the storm, which is the center of the cyclone, which is a region of calm. So around the eye, you have the eye wall. That is where you see the vortex system of rising and descending air and high-speed winds, which would have accumulated to form the cyclonic system or the vortex system. So a cyclone is basically fed by the moisture, which is constantly being supplied by the water below. So for a cyclone to form in a place like, let's say, Bay of Bengal or in any tropical sea or ocean, you need ideal temperatures of around 27 degrees Celsius. At this rate, the evaporation will remain quite continuous, constantly providing the required moisture, which fuels the cyclonic system. So the warm air keeps rising up, the cold air descends, and it forms these dense rain-bearing clouds, and the low-pressure depression attracts the winds from other high-pressure zones, and Coriolis force takes care of the rest, which introduces the spin, causing the system to rotate, and that's what leads to the formation of this vortex system. So when the eye of the storm crosses over land, it is that event which we refer to as landfall event. The cyclone eventually, as it moves towards the landmass and strikes the landmass, it brings torrential rain, high-speed winds, and coastal surge as well. But it is the landfall event which is closely tracked and monitored, because that is when the maximum impact is noticed. So landfall is the place and time where the cyclone strikes the landmass. It's when the eye of the storm passes over the landmass. So this event is associated with high-speed winds, in the range of 180 to up to 280, 300 kilometers per hour. This can uproot everything in its path. It brings torrential rainfall, even leading to landslides and flash floods. There would be coastal surge as well that causes coastal flooding in the coastal areas. So this is what causes the disaster. So from this article, you can understand what is a landfall and even be aware of re-emergence of cyclones and recurving of cyclones. Now coming back to the editorial, the point that the article is making is that India should be better prepared. Our focus is more on giving relief during disaster when the disaster has already happened. Our focus is more on rehabilitation, which is good. But at the same time, we should improve our preparedness. Though we have done significantly better compared to pre-2005, still there is a lot of scope to improve because there is a established a scientific study which clearly shows that extreme weather events, they are going up in their frequency and intensity as they are driven by climate change. So what can we do when it comes to such cyclones? One, of course, is to improve our early warning systems. The IMD has already done quite well with better forecasting, with more sensors and more number of Doppler radars. But the IMD is on a mission to further expand the forecasting network. Today, IMD relies on supercomputers to crunch the data, to provide the forecasting models, to generate real-time alerts. And NDMA with Home Ministry, they have developed a very efficient real-time messaging system to deliver the alerts to all the stakeholders in real time, to the state governments, the district authorities, to the media and the public, and concerned ministries as well. So today, NDMA has the capability to quickly mobilize the NDRF. And if required, the Defense Ministry and the armed forces will also be roped in to assist the NDRF and the local authorities. So early warning can be further improved with further increased coverage of Doppler radars and satellite-based monitoring. And with better forecasting models, IMD can provide more accurate alerts. For example, in Tamil Nadu, the intense rainfall, which eventually was witnessed, it was off the mark compared to the estimates of IMD. So IMD should work on improving its early warning and forecasting and the accuracy of it. Then parallelly, there should be more focus on evacuation. And for this, the people should be aware, they should be trained. This is very essential for the people to be aware as to what to do when the alert is received regarding an incoming disaster. Then more importantly, to deal with the heavy rainfall, the floods, etc., structural measures are necessary which can help in mitigating the impact of the disaster. Maybe we won't be able to prevent a cyclone, right? It's way out of human control, but definitely we can mitigate the impact. For example, by strengthening the bunds to hold back the excess water, by removing the silt deposition in all the canals and across the drainage network, protecting our natural buffers, including wetlands, lakes, and other water bodies, and ensuring that illegal encroachments are cleared. Because this is what aggravates the problem of flooding, especially urban flooding. Cities like Chennai are highly vulnerable. So this time Chennai was spared, but there have been other cyclones which have caused devastation in Chennai. Other cities as well, Kolkata and others, which are in the path of these cyclones, they see intense destruction mainly due to urban flooding. It's because either the drainage canals are blocked due to the solid waste which is unscientifically disposed, or due to the silt which has been deposited, due to the weak structures that are present, and also due to illegal encroachment of the drainage area. So this is something that can be tackled quite easily with better enforcement of existing land use and zoning standards. The local bylaws regarding the building standards, the land use and the zoning standards, if they are enforced properly and illegal structures and encroachments are cleared, this will go a long way in reducing the impact of these sudden floods that occur. For example, for the city of Chennai, the center has provided a special fund to carry out a mitigation assessment with regard to urban flooding. So this has to be completed as soon as possible. And even the state government has conducted a study on the mitigation efforts needed to tackle urban flooding in cities like Chennai, which are prone to the impact of such cyclones. So such reports have to be made public, and the government should work on it, implement the recommendations so that we can safeguard our cities, our coastal areas, which are very, very vulnerable because of the rising incidents of extreme weather events. So that is what we learn from this important editorial. Now let's take up a practice question. Extreme weather events will increase in frequency in the coming years. In the light of the statement, how should authorities prepare for disasters? Explain with a recent example. So please take up this question for your answer writing practice. Let's see if you can write a good answer, and please post your answers in the comment section. Now let's take up another interesting article and a very important article. The 2nd and 3rd of December is a tragic day for India. It was on the intervening night of 2nd and 3rd December in 1984 that India witnessed one of its worst industrial tragedies, the Bhopal gas disaster. In fact, till date, it stands out as one of the worst industrial disasters in the entire world, not just in India. Thousands of people were killed as they were exposed to a toxic gas that leaked from a fertilizer plant. And the lasting impact can be seen even today. The survivors, the victims, they have suffered from various health consequences, from cancers to organ dysfunction to even hereditary conditions. They have become very common in Bhopal. And the worst part is the victims haven't even been adequately compensated. Victims are still fighting for justice. So on the ground, near the site of this plant, you still find a lot of toxic material which is still present in large quantities. And the article is focused on the toxic waste which remains at the disaster site in Bhopal. So let's look at this article. Let's understand what really happened in Bhopal on this tragic night and what kind of toxic substances are still found, what could be the health impact, and what should the government do. See, the factory that was responsible for this disaster was Union Carbide, a fertilizer and pesticide company owned by a US-based parent company. It was essentially manufacturing a particular insecticide known as carbaryl. So to manufacture this particular insecticide, this plant would carry out a reaction between two highly toxic raw ingredients. One is methyl isocyanate, MIC, with one naphthol. So MIC is a highly toxic compound. MIC is also very volatile. When it reacts with water, right, at high temperatures, it will start boiling the water itself. So it requires a cooling mechanism to keep the plant functional and safe. And even the reaction with the water releases the heat as well, which basically turns it into fumes. And these fumes can easily spread. And this is what happened on this tragic night. Due to the negligence of the factory, the poor maintenance, the cooling systems failed. The MIC, which was interacting with water, it started boiling the water, the fumes were released, and the fumes escaped the vents and the piping systems, thus spreading to the nearby residential colonies. Now, problem with MIC is that, unlike other toxic gases, it has no odor. It has no distinct smell. So generally, when you get a distinct odor, it's like an alert system. Now look at LPG, for example, right? A distinct odor has been added so that people can detect a gas leak, right? But MIC as well, it is odorless. So the whole city of Bhopal was asleep because this incident occurred at midnight on the intervening night of 2nd and 3rd December. The only immediate reaction is that your eyes will start burning. So definitely for those people who are awake, for them, the eyes were irritated. They started going to the doctors, knocking on clinics, right? As soon as they started developing these adverse symptoms. But the majority of them were still asleep. So there was absolutely no sign, no alert. And people who were asleep, they inhaled the MIC, which is highly toxic, resulting in the death and the tragedy that followed. But now studies have established that maybe MIC was not the only toxic gas that leaked from Union Carbide. There have been several studies from Indian and global researchers, because this happens to be one of the worst industrial tragedies of the world. So studies have shown the presence of other toxic substances as well, which might have played a role. Generally, popular media, even the government for that matter, has obsessed about methyl isocyanate. Right? We always hear that Bhopal tragedy was just because of MIC. While this was the main contributor, there might have been other toxic substances which could have contributed to the tragedy. Union Carbide till date has not given any official report on what toxic substances leaked from the plant. But studies have shown a possibility of hydrogen cyanide being present as well at the contaminated site. Because the viscera of the victims showed a blood red color, which is a clear indicator of poisoning through hydrogen cyanide. So that is a possibility that we need to consider. So later studies have shown that there is enormous amount of toxic waste left behind at the Union Carbide plant. A government report shows that 11 lakh tons, imagine 11 lakh tons of contaminated soil remains. 1 ton of mercury, which is a heavy metal and highly toxic, remains at the disaster site. 150 tons of underground dumps. Some of the toxic material was placed in underground dumps which remains over there, contaminating the groundwater table and the nearby water systems and soil. Right now, the government has identified around 340 metric tons for incineration, for which the union government has given 126 crore rupees to the Madhya Pradesh government. But there are protests against this move, because any attempt to burn the toxic waste could release toxic fumes, which could be hazardous for the health of the people. So right now, the government is yet to take a decision whether to burn the 340 metric tons of waste which has been identified. So it's been 40 years, 4 decades, and very little of this toxic waste has been cleared by the authorities. That shows the lack of seriousness amongst the state and central authorities, right? Even the court has failed to intervene adequately. So large quantities of toxic waste remains, and it contains heavy metals, organic, inorganic compounds which are detrimental to human health. So this article is focused on those toxic substances. So let's understand what kind of toxic substances are still found at the Bhopal tragedy site. A study conducted by a team of leading researchers has established a major concentration of heavy metals including mercury, chromium, lead, copper, and even nickel. Now, heavy metals, they're called heavy metals because they're very dense, almost 5 times more dense than water. Now, these heavy metals in higher concentration, and if you have a longer exposure to it, it is extremely dangerous. You take mercury, for example, it leads to birth defects. It affects multiple organs. So, mercury poisoning is a major concern. It reminds us of the Minamata disaster in Japan, which even led to the Minamata Convention to tackle mercury poisoning. Chromium is an essential nutrient for humans as well. But however, in excess quantity and long exposure, it can affect multiple organs and it is a carcinogen. It can even affect the photosynthesis process of plants. Copper and nickel are extremely dangerous in large quantities, right? Similarly, lead is a carcinogen affecting liver, pancreas, and multiple other organs and functions. And the health impact is detrimental when there is long exposure to these heavy metals. Similarly, the study has established the presence of several organic pollutants: hexachlorobutadiene, chloroform, carbon tetrachloride, and trichlorobenzene. These organic pollutants, they are extremely hazardous. Again, it could lead to fertility issues, respiratory issues. It could affect the functioning of the lung, liver, and other key organs, and it could even contribute to cancer as well. And despite this, large quantities of such waste remains at the contaminated plant site. And the authorities have not cleared it after 40 years. So that is the reason why this article is focused on the toxic waste that is present here. And the solution is very simple. It requires proactive intervention from the government and the scientific community. It requires a safe handling of the toxic waste and a safe disposal of the toxic waste. Because there are assessments by studies that the presence of the toxic waste could still be affecting the health of people who still reside around the Union Carbide factory. So that is the pressing issue being highlighted by this important article. Is that clear? Now, studies have even established the presence of POPs, persistent organic pollutants, and some of these organic pollutants are persistent in nature, meaning they don't degrade, they don't break down easily, they remain as it is in the environment for decades and centuries. So such organic substances, which are pollutants, are called persistent organic pollutants or POPs. Now, there is an international convention to deal with persistent organic pollutants. Can you let me know which convention is this in the comment section? That is a small assignment for you. There is an international convention that deals with POPs or persistent organic pollutants. So please let me know which is this convention in the comment section and read about this convention as well. Now, coming to the next article, on the front page of the Delhi edition, we have an update on India-China relations based on the statement that was issued by India's Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, to the Lok Sabha. In the ongoing winter session, questions were raised by the opposition about the border tensions between India-China at Ladakh and the recent resolution that India-China have achieved. So while answering to these questions, Foreign Minister Jaishankar has given a very important update regarding the progress that India-China have made. I'm sure all of you remember the border clashes in Ladakh that broke out in 2020. At multiple locations, the Chinese PLA, the People's Liberation Army, carried out multiple incursions in violation of the agreed protocols and agreements. At places like Panongso Lake, Demchok, Galwan Valley and Hot Springs area, and as well as at Depsang Plains. So at all these locations, China carried out multiple incursions, and this was a direct threat to India's sovereignty. It was challenged by the Indian Army. India went in for a massive mobilization of troops to counter the Chinese incursion, and this led to an escalation from both the sides, as both sides brought in more troops and weapons and equipment, leading to a standoff. It even led to clashes at Galwan River Valley, where both sides engaged in hand-to-hand combat, resulting in 20 Indian soldiers being martyred. And this was the biggest escalation that we had seen since 1962 war. So after years of negotiation, by using the established protocols, because between India and China, we have few agreements signed in 1993, 1996, even in 2013, related to maintaining peace and tranquility at the border. So the Peace and Tranquility Agreement of 93 along line of actual control and the Confidence Building Measures Agreement in 1996, they provide for established protocols on how to resolve these issues. Because between India and China, such issues are likely to happen because we both have a different perception of the border, right? So since we have a different perception of where exactly the LAC passes, the line of actual control, the de facto border, such incursions are likely to happen. So to prevent them and to ensure that they don't escalate into a bigger conflict, we have certain protocols in place. These protocols provide for commander level talks at the military level, so that without the involvement of the full government and without a full-blown escalation, the issues could be resolved at the local level by the local military commanders, or if required, the senior military commanders. So this mechanism was reactivated after India reached out to China diplomatically, and after years of talks, we resolved the standoff at some places such as Panongso Lake, at Galwan Valley and Hot Springs. So at these areas, both sides agreed on a disengagement and de-escalation protocol, and they pulled back the troops as well, and they even created a buffer so that both sides will not encounter each other, and they even started restoring the patrolling at Panong Su, Galwan Valley and Hot Springs. But however, the dispute at Demchok and Depsang Plain, the standoff at Demchok and Depsang Plain remained until recently. Just a few weeks ago in 2024, India-China started making progress on the talks related to Demchok and Depsang Plains. India's NSA met with China's state councillor as part of the BRICS meetings. And finally, during the BRICS summit in Kazan in Russia, PM Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping announced that India-China have finally achieved a disengagement and de-escalation. So Foreign Minister Jaishankar has given an update regarding this. He has informed the parliament that both sides have completed the disengagement at all the flashpoints, including Demchok and Depsang Plain. So after 4 years of standoff, both sides have disengaged, meaning they've taken a step back, the troops are being pulled back, and normal patrolling is being resumed. The previous patrolling points which were accessible to Indian Army have been restored, which means Indian Army is now able to come back with its patrols and ensure that it can monitor the areas under its control, which we claim as part of Indian territory. So similarly, on the Chinese side, China also would have resumed its normal patrolling. And the Foreign Minister has informed the Parliament that now disengagement is completed, patrolling has resumed normally as it was before 2020, and now we are in the process of de-escalation. This would refer to the complete withdrawal of troops. The additional troops that were brought in by both sides will be completely withdrawn, leading to de-escalation of tensions. Eventually, they will be de-inducted, as in the troops will be sent back to their bases, to their commands, and thus bringing back normalcy at these flashpoints in Ladakh. So this is indeed a big development as we get an official confirmation from the government that disengagement has been completed, normal patrolling has resumed, and very soon we will be completing de-escalation as well, the withdrawal of troops and eventual de-induction of troops. So that is a big development as far as India-China relations are concerned. Now let's move towards the prelim section. We have a couple of articles. On page 14, we have an article referring to the MH-60 Romeo helicopters. You can see the helicopter as well in the image given in the article. The MH-60 Romeo is designed and developed by Lockheed Martin, a US aerospace defense company. So clearly it's an American defense product. So India has procured the MH-60 Romeo helicopters for its armed forces. We have signed a contract with Lockheed Martin as part of the foreign military sales program of the US government. The US government has a program called Foreign Military Sales Program. So under this, the US can sell critical defense equipment to key partners such as India with congressional approval. So this reduces the time in negotiation. It reduces the delays. Essentially, it's a government-to-government deal, similar to how India, France have struck government-to-government deals for Rafale fighter jets. Similarly, under Foreign Military Sales Program, the US can directly supply key equipment to partners like India with congressional approval. So India is looking at procuring maybe around 24 of these helicopters, and already we have received 9 of them, which have been inducted into service. Now, why are these helicopters unique? They are unique because they are known for their anti-submarine warfare capabilities. These helicopters are also known as submarine hunters. So India has obviously procured these helicopters from the US by keeping an eye on China's submarine fleet. You might have heard that China has built a formidable submarine fleet, which has been deployed far away into the Indian Ocean as well. The PLA Navy or plan has increasingly deployed its submarine fleet, including nuclear-powered submarines, into the Indian Ocean. So India has been trying to build up its anti-submarine warfare capabilities with American help. So a few years ago, US had already supplied an aircraft to India, which specializes in anti-submarine warfare capability and reconnaissance, maritime reconnaissance capability. The P-8 Poseidon, the P-8I, which is the Indian variant of the Poseidon aircraft. So Indian Navy already operates the P-8 Poseidon, which is a large aircraft, which is capable of maritime surveillance and reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and as well as to hunt submarines. So apart from this aircraft, now we have procured a specialized helicopter from the US again, which also has anti-submarine warfare capabilities. Now this topic is in news again because India is looking at some components and we are signing a new deal under the same agreement to procure these components from the US. India is looking at few radio systems, infrared and optical sensors, which will further enhance the anti-submarine warfare capabilities of the MH-60 Romeo helicopters. So the US has entered into this deal with Lockheed Martin and the government of India, and now it is awaiting congressional approval from the US Congress. So US is willing to supply the additional components requested by India to further enhance the warfighting capabilities of MH-60 Romeo. So that is why this platform is critical and very important for the exams as well. Now coming to the last article for today. Yesterday there was a shocker for the entire world. Almost every country was taken by surprise. The whole world was made to sit up and take notice of an unprecedented development in East Asia. You might have heard that yesterday night, South Korea did something unexpected. I'm sure you would have known that South Korea is a well-developed country, a democracy, a full-fledged democracy, at least for the last few decades. So you often don't expect such news coming out of developed democratic states. But South Korean president declared martial law and ordered the army to take control and appointed the army chief as the commander of the martial law to enforce the provisions of the martial law, which prohibits all political activities, which takes away the fundamental constitutional rights and essentially turns the country into a military regime. Now, this was quite shocking. But see, South Korea is not new to military coups and dictatorships and military regimes. There was a time when South Korea only saw such military rules and regimes, especially in 1960s and 80s. During this period, South Korea has gone through military coups, martial law period, and essentially it's an emergency period where constitutional rights are suspended. And South Korea has experienced such developments in the past. But of late, in last 40 years at least, South Korea had been a strong democracy with a firm belief in constitutional principles. And it was also a major economy as well, right, of the East Asia and the Asia region, the Asia Pacific region. But now the decision of the president of South Korea shook everyone. So what was the reason? Why did South Korean president declare martial law? And what has happened after that? The South Korean president justified the decision by stating that the political opposition is posing a threat to the government and the country. He alleged that the opposition is working for North Korea, the hostile neighbor of South Korea. Now, these are largely unsubstantiated claims. Without any basis or evidence, the South Korean president alleged that the opposition is posing a threat to the country and the state itself by working with pro-North Korean forces. And he justified the decision, stating that he is protecting the country from North Korea and the opposition, which has turned hostile. But this decision was not accepted by the legislators. The army, shockingly, accepted the orders. The army chief even gladly took up the role of the martial commander, and the army was even deployed across important locations. Because under South Korean constitution, if the parliament takes a vote and rejects any martial law with a majority, then the president will have to revoke the decision. South Korean constitution states that if majority of the parliamentarians vote against martial law and its imposition, then the president will have to withdraw it. So to prevent this from happening, army troops were rushed to the National Assembly. Imagine army preventing elected legislators from entering the parliament. That was the situation in South Korea yesterday. It was absolute chaos. The people of South Korea were completely shaken, and they came out in the streets and rebelled and protested against the South Korean president, calling for his arrest. So these massive protests eventually brought pressure on the South Korean president and the army. Finally, around 190 legislators, they managed to storm the parliament by force. They managed to overcome the barricades put up by the army, and they stormed into the parliament and cast a vote, a unanimous 190-0 vote against the imposition of martial law. So this tremendous pressure, accompanied with international pressure, finally pushed the South Korean president to revoke the martial law as well. US, China, and many other countries expressed concern. UK, Japan, they all expressed concern, which brought international pressure as well. And finally, South Korean president has revoked the imposition of martial law. So this unprecedented development points out how fragile democracies can be, and how it is very important to have a strong parliamentary institution and constitutional institutions that can protect democratic principles. So that is what we take away from this article. UPSC tends to focus on such developments where there are military coups and emergencies and martial laws, especially in prelims. So that's why I feel the topic could be relevant. So with this, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the topics. Now, if you want this PDF with all the images and notes, join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code, and I'll be sharing it after the session. And also join our official Telegram channel of Unacademy IAS English. You can find the link in the video description, because after the session, we'll conduct a daily quiz where we provide you MCQs to practice based on these topics. So that is it for today. If you guys have enjoyed the session, understood everything, please press the like button. Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching.